have a conversation, and then we'll get to lunch. So my name is Wamboi Gashiengo Nyabero. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Vilgro Africa. And I'll get right into it. Maybe. All right. So I'll tell you a story about myself. And why I'm telling you a story about myself, first of all, I heard a lot of conversations earlier about, first of all, very interesting question this morning. Who is an African? Or what makes an African? Is it the skin of my color? Is it where I grew up? What is it that makes me an African? So I'll tell you where I grew up. I was born in the beautiful highlands in Limuru, very, very cold. And I was there for the first probably 18 years of my life. I never thought of it as a beautiful place. It just was. It just was where I was born, right? And I'll come back to that. What it is that we live with that we don't even notice, right? So then I proceeded to go to school in a very, very small college in California called Stanford University, where and Stanford has been mentioned a couple times in this forum as well. And I find that interesting as well. But I did a couple of engineering degrees at Stanford, and I proceeded to move to a company called St. Jude Medical, which is now part of Abbott, to do research and development and manufacturing of medical devices, predominantly pacemakers, implantable defibrillators. So I am a real techie, right? I love engineering. Now, one of the things that I do know is that hardware is hard. So I got a little mic put in my ear, and it took about a couple minutes to actually get it to fit, because I guess I don't have a standard size ear. So this thing is hanging. I'm not sure it's going to stay. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But that is a part of what happens with hardware. It's not easy, right? All right. So after. What do I need to do? There we go. So once I had been working in a big corporation, I moved on to be an entrepreneur. I had a startup. I have a patented medical device that is probably the topic for another day. And in the midst of the pandemic, I was working with a team of engineers in Nairobi to develop a ventilator, which is what you see there, which is now a very nice bookend. Actually, it's bigger than the bookend, but all it does is sit and gather dust. Hardware is hard, right? Very, very hard. Why do I tell you this story about myself? For the most part, it's because I think a lot of people have an idea of what a tech developer looks like. And it's not me, right? It's not me. And I think when we talk about how we are funding technology companies, we have something in our minds that we are thinking about when somebody walks on the stage and says, I'm talking about tech in Africa. Typically, it's not me you're thinking of, right? Okay, anyway, I'll leave that alone. So now I work at Vilgro Africa, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer. And what I'm doing is I'm supporting startups that are developing tech. For the most part, and I had this conversation with someone recently, most, whether they are service companies or any kind of companies, are being enabled by tech more and more and more. But the kind of companies that I am supporting are people who have a component of hardware in their business. But I'll tell you a little bit about Vilgro Africa. We've been around for about 7 years. Started off as Vilgro Kenya. I wasn't there then. I've only been with Vilgro Africa about a year and a half. But 7 years ago, Vilgro Africa was born. There is a Vilgro India, which is the mother company that I guess spawned Vilgro Kenya. And to date, we have 40 healthcare companies that have been supported. A couple of them actually that Vilgro has worked with are in the room. Turaco, I believe, is one of them. And a shout out to Neurolabs that have been part of our AI accelerator, and Placidius from AgriPoa, also AI. So we have several really good, we have a good track record. We are fairly early stage, so we provide a small amount of seed funding. And I think the key for why we are successful is that we blend that with technical assistance. Now, whether that is technology-based or whether that is business-based, where we are helping people to think about what their business strategies are, what it's going to take for them to be investor-ready, and so on and so forth. So that very small seed funding in the past 7 years has unlocked $18 million in follow-on funding. And because we're an impact investor, what we are very proud of is that we have touched almost 2 million lives. All right, so health tech and med tech. I think those are two terms that are used interchangeably sometimes. In my mind, health tech is the umbrella term, but I think, and the venture capitalists in the room can correct me, I think health tech is typically referring to e-health and things that are about healthcare management or about healthcare delivery, telemedicine, insurance, those kinds of things. When we start talking about medtech, we're talking about some form of hardware that is doing diagnostics or treatment. And so I think that the e-health is very well covered in raising capital, whether that's VC or otherwise. Where we start seeing some problems in Africa is when we're looking for capital to go with the med tech. And I think, and it makes a lot of sense because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to develop your artificial intelligence. It takes a lot of time to build your medical device. And there is a need for very patient capital to journey with you to the point where there is revenue. And so that's part of what I want to talk about is what are some of those things that are needed to get us other than capital? Because I think there was a conversation about other than capital, what else do you need? And I think there are things in the ecosystem that we really, really need for medtech to be an actual thing. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of our medtech companies that we support at Vilgro Africa. And I think to give you a sense for what it is that it takes to do medtech. And I'm leaving artificial intelligence alone because I'm sure you'll hear from Neurolabs and AgriPoa a little bit about artificial intelligence. But these things also fit into this type of thing that I'm talking about. So Alite. Alite is a Ugandan company that has developed a vein locator. Very simple device. It enables a physician or nurse or whoever to find a child's vein, and presumably an adult's vein as well, but children's veins is where they started. And this is the thing with stories. If you are in an environment where you are working with clinicians and time again you see a problem that they're trying to solve, in this case, trying to find a child's vein while the child cries and screams and is in pain and needs to be, to get IV fluids or medication through their veins, you start thinking, if you're an engineer, how do I solve this? And so the wonderful people at Alite, over the last, I believe, 4 years, as simple as this device is, it has taken 4 years to develop, to test, to go through a clinical study. Well, now they're at the point where they have done that clinical study and they have shown that this works very well. Vilgro Africa has put in a little bit of capital, not a lot of capital because we are typically pre-seed or seed. And we are journeying with A-Light to get them to market. And I think some of the things that we're going to find, they are going to build 200 devices, put them in the market. Then what? Right? We need a manufacturing partner. They need to be able to get through regulatory approvals. They need, and you know, when I say these things, I sometimes feel like I'm making it worse for people who do hardware, because yes, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have what it takes, but we need to have these conversations because we need to be able to set up these things that we need to be able to take wonderful products like this to market. In order to have these be investable, we need to have a couple of things, and I'll talk about those in the next slide. But I do want to talk about another of our products. The lunch is calling, it sounds like. But VaxiBox. This is a medical fridge, which is going to be solar powered. It is solar powered, and it is smart. So it has an IoT component that enables it to be remotely interacted with to, understand what the temperature is, what's going on with the fridge. So we do have a functional MVP, or the company Drop Access does have a functional MVP. And a shout out actually to the CEO at Drop Access, who is a woman tech founder. That's surprisingly something that I haven't heard discussed in this forum, is women tech founders, because there are not very many of them. You may have noticed that by seeing who's up here talking about tech from a founder's perspective. But Nora has a functional MVP. They're in process of testing in the field. They're also looking for a manufacturing partner. And I think you're going to start seeing some of those things that are needed in the ecosystem, because you can't just build a medical device in Kariobangi, right? You need to actually have an ISO 13485 certified facility, and it's capital intensive, right? Okay, so these are some of the things that are needed in the ecosystem. Regulatory pathways and market access. So when we designed a ventilator in 2019, 2020, it very quickly became clear that there wasn't a pathway within the country to approve medical devices or medical equipment. There was a scramble to figure it out for ventilators because we were scared to death, literally, that COVID was coming and that we would need ventilators. But for the most part, for people who want to build medical devices, there isn't a clear path. You typically will have to go and get a CE mark or an FDA approval to bring the device back into most African countries, right? And that needs to change. Now, I know that there is the African Medical Device Forum, AMA, the African Medical Agency, and that these things are being worked on, but a little bit slow. So we who are in the industry, or who would like to see this kind of tech happening within Africa, need to start having conversations about what can we do about having regulatory pathways, regulatory harmonization, whether it's across the whole of Africa or just maybe East Africa. What does that look like? Medical device manufacturing. I mean, I kind of made a joke about going to Kariobangi and getting a medical device manufactured. When you look around in Kenya, I know of only one ISO 13485 certified manufacturing facility, and that's in Kilifi. That's Revito Healthcare. There may be others, and I may be very, very wrong that there's more, but I'm sure they will not be 5. So something needs to happen then. What kind of capital do we need? What kind of government, partnerships do we need to be able to do that? Cost optimization, supply chains, all of these things that startups are having to deal with on their own, what is it that needs to happen in the environment to make it possible for our startups to be able to get the components that they need, whether it's from China or India, or can we even start an industry here where we are building our own components, electronics and otherwise. Engineering capacity building. I think this morning somebody mentioned the kind of education that gets people to think about being entrepreneurs. I think the education also that helps people think about engineering in a very broad sense. And I almost want to put Tom on the spot and ask him, how did he learn to do artificial intelligence? It's not a straight path. It's never a straight path. And we need to figure out, what does that path look like? What could it look like? How do we better educate people and provide engineering capacity that will enable us to do better? Go-to-market partnerships could be government, private industry, and otherwise. So I will not belabor that. So I think we can have a very well-oiled medtech ecosystem. This is sort of where we are right now. We're doing frugal innovation. We're trying to figure out how do we patch it all together. But if we can start having a system around it so that we are applying data and knowledge, clinical needs assessments, R&D capacity, what is the market? If we have that kind of data that we're applying to the work that we are doing, if we can increase the level of tech knowledge and tech, if you're doing artificial intelligence, you have enough computing capability to do what you need to do. Do you have storage capability? What is the infrastructure that you need? Materials, manufacturing, infrastructure, all of those things that are the bedrock of being able to do tech, that's hardware, needs to be in place. I think we can capture a market. Now, I don't remember who said earlier that even though Nigeria has a bigger population, they may not have as big of a market, which is true if you're talking about consumer products. Now, if you're talking about things like health-related products, of which we are spending foreign currency to buy medical devices to the tune of several $billions, how can we keep that kind of foreign currency within Africa by spreading out the market, by being able to have regulatory harmonization such that if I develop a product in Kenya, I can sell it in Senegal or Nigeria or, anywhere in Africa. How can we do that? And that right now is a question. I'm hoping that we can have many conversations around. And if we talk about, if this is a conversation that needs to be had about medtech, it's probably a conversation that needs to be had about health tech, e-health. It's probably a conversation that can be had in other sectors. I just don't know enough about those sectors, so I'll talk about medtech. And that is as far as I'll go, and especially since I know lunch is probably warming up and maybe getting cold, I will leave it at that, but I'll be happy to take any questions.
Hi, my name is Philip from Catapult Africa, and thanks for sharing this. We see the same thing across what we're doing. What you tend to find is from North Africa, particularly Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco, and South Africa, there's a lot of R&D, and so a lot of the startups that come out are really IP hardware engineering. And that's a huge market because we've invested in similar across the globe. My question to you is beyond just the policy, because yes, there's the policy and framework, but is there anything with regards to the need for us right now in these markets is more low-hanging fruit, or is it just a case of our research and development capabilities through our tertiary education, through to university, that is affecting this? Because you don't get, we've invested in some companies up in Tunisia where an entire team is PhD, doctoral thesis type of, and they're hard engineering that have been doing this for the last 15 years. We've seen an absence across sub-Saharan Africa where there's that expertise, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you for your question, and I do agree. Using the tertiary, using universities and people who are doing research would be a wonderful way to go now. That's a conversation that could take a couple hours, actually, because part of what happens within our universities is that people are doing research and development, and then that research gets stuck within the universities, and there isn't a very good IP policies within those universities to enable that IP to get out of the universities and be commercialized. And I know that Kenya, the Kenya National Innovation Agency, is working with universities to enable the commercialization of that kind of IP. And I think that's going to be a very good step towards getting people in those institutions be part of the conversation, but also the actual commercialization and getting started with startups. I know that there are a lot of people in universities who want to do the research, but really don't want to be entrepreneurs. So the whole idea of technology licensing and how that's going to work is something that probably needs to happen fairly quickly, because research that's done today is not necessarily still going to be waiting around 10 years from today to be a useful and worthwhile startup. So that's a very, very good point, and something that needs to be worked on. Now, I think a lot of the time when people talk about appropriate technology, they are talking about low tech. I personally do not think that appropriate technology is necessarily low tech. It could be very high tech. It could be leapfrogging what's going on in the rest of the world in the same way that M-Pesa did with mobile money, to use artificial intelligence versus, going through the middle step of getting diagnostic equipment that human beings are interacting with. I mean, human beings still interact, but you see what I mean? We could start thinking about how do we leapfrog? How do we not have to pass through, I guess, is it the Industrial Revolution to get to 4IR, right? The Fourth Industrial Revolution. So these are conversations that need to happen a lot, so that I don't think there are any obvious answers. And I think that we have to bring people who have capital and people who talk about technology and people who are in policy all together around a table and figure out what works for us, and not look to Silicon Valley and say, that's the way they did it. We have to go through those steps. I think we can leapfrog a lot of those steps. My opinion.
This one is working. Yeah.
Thanks, Mambui, for your presentation.
Absolutely.
One of the things you mentioned is around, obviously, with medical devices, for example, it takes about 4 years to just get to the research part. And a typical lifespan of a VC firm is between 5 to 7 years. So do you find that there's a gap in terms of funding for medical startups, medtech and health tech startups? And is there a need maybe for alternative funding sources to actually then support these entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So Vilgro Africa plays a small part. We do fund, we are very early funders, hoping to get startups to the place where they can actually look for VC funding and beyond. But there is a very big gap, that valley of death, where if you don't get your research done, you're not going to make it to the bigger funding that you need to commercialize and scale. So finding other capital sources that can take these startups through that valley is absolutely critical.
And thank you, boy. I'm very grateful. Let's give her a hand for this conversation. Thank you so much. Well done. For a person who's standing between us and lunch, she's done a really good job. Very good, engaging conversation. If she's around, her email address is over there, wamboye@vilgroafrica.org. And it's lunchtime. So it's now 2:45, correct? See you at 2:20. Yes, there you go. Voila. Go eat. Bon appetit. Go work. Go. Play music. Play some music. Play lunch music. Like not jazz. That's going to make people sleep. More like dance, EDM, techno, house, something like that. See you guys at 2:20.
you.